Good afternoon, and welcome to HLS 207. This is the third part of a three-part series we've been doing here at reInvent, highlighting Geisinger's epic journey of migrating their clinical systems onto AWS. I'm Mike Hedgie, and very soon, I'm with AWS, and very soon Marlon Moyer from Geisinger Health will be coming on stage to join. I'd just like to get an idea of who's in the audience, if you don't mind. First of all, by show of hands, just raising your hand, do you work for a health system? Hey, that's great. Keep your hands up if you work for a health system that uses Epic. Okay. Now, other question. And yes, you can put your hands down. And now, do you work for a technology company? They're offering services, solutions, or consulting. Okay, that's great. I think you're going to find some information of value here for either of those areas. So welcome. Over the next 60 minutes, our journey is really going to be as follows. I'm going to start off giving you a state of the Epic on AWS community and some of the outcomes that they've experienced. And then Marlon is going to come up, and he's going to share a little bit about Geisinger's. First of all, catch you up for those that didn't catch the first two sessions of Geisinger Health's journey, but also share some of the lessons learned now that they've been live for over a year. Then Marlon and I will sit down, have a little bit of a fireside chat here, and talk a little bit more in depth on the journey, and give you an opportunity to ask some questions too, as long as we have enough time. And then we'll give you something to think about doing when you return back to the office on Monday morning. So as I said, I'm Mike Hedgie. I'm a EHR leader at AWS. I help health systems become wildly successful running Epic on AWS. And I've been at this adventure at Amazon for about 3.5 years now. But my adventure with Epic has lasted a little bit longer than that. I started with Epic back in 1992, and at that time we were a very small company. We had 30 brilliant people, well, 29 plus me. And this photo was actually taken with a film camera back in September of 1992 at the 13th Epic Annual User Group meeting. Now, that's me on the right, and some of you might recognize Carl on the left. Carl joined in '85. He was a developer, and he was tasked with creating a new electronic medical records system. See, up to this point, Epic software featuring the Chronicles operational database and applications like Cadence and Resolute. They were delivered using text-based terminals. And we were preparing to present at this user group meeting this new graphical user interface for a new electronic medical record system, or EMR, called Legacy. And it was a client-server application. So in front of me, that portable computer was the database server. It was running Legacy and Chronicles, and it was running on top of DataTree M, running on top of Microsoft DOS. And over in front of Carl, that was the client side of the application. That was a Legacy Windows application. Seems odd to be calling it that now, but that was something that was really, really unique. It became a hit. No one really had done anything like that back in '92, and most notably for the ambulatory clinic area. Hospitals, yes, but not ambulatory clinics. So I was one of two people a few months later to first install Legacy in the spring of 1993, and it really caught on. We renamed it from Legacy to Epicare, mainly because people were trying to replace legacy systems back then and not implement them. But the technology has changed quite a bit since then. I became Epic's technical fellow, And I focused on some of the new emerging technologies and generated target platforms for our developers to ensure we're compatible with, to make sure that these platforms delivered Epic that was fast, secure, and reliable. A lot of things had changed. I spent about 30 years, a little under 30 years at Epic, and retired from Epic in 2021. But it turns out I'm not that good at retirement. And so I'm still enjoying this journey. So I get excited about technology. I get excited about Epic on AWS. I think everybody should be doing it. But I also sometimes need to ground myself on the true North Stars of health systems. And organizations will use many strategies and techniques to achieve the quintuple aim, whether it be workflow improvement, whether it be case management, improvements in medical improvements and scientific improvements, as well as technology improvements. And one of those key technologies is the EHR. And Epic continues to innovate, and they're providing new functionality for their EHR on a 3-month cadence. And I think for Epic to be truly effective for the physicians, it needs to run on fast, reliable, and secure infrastructure. Historically, healthcare IT has performed that heavy lifting to make it fast, reliable, and secure. And they really have done an excellent job on it, but it takes a lot of time and effort to do it. You have to have the rigor of selecting the right hardware, and then creating the golden image that runs on top of it, ensuring that the right firmware is up to date, that the drivers are up to date, that the operating system configuration is good, that the application configuration is good, and then sometimes the presentation application configuration is good, to make sure that it is right to be fast and reliable. And sometimes this can take months. And once you've made that, you don't want to make any changes to it. But coming out of the pandemic, many health systems have told us that the business is really driving them to be more agile. And in the on-premises world, it's hard to be agile. It's hard to adopt an adaptable business model and still be good stewards of cost. So what we're seeing is more and more health systems, even those that have done a great job on premises, they're migrating their Epic on-premises environments into AWS. And part of what's driving that is our collaboration with the Epic community to ensure that they're getting great outcomes, and that they're delivering a fast, reliable, and secure environment on AWS, while at the same time helping them be good stewards of cost through FinOps and cost optimization. So our Epic on AWS community, we've had folks live with production in Epic for over 2 years now, and they're starting to share some of their outcomes. And from a reliability standpoint, every health system running production Epic on AWS, they've shared with us that they've been able to provide their caregivers continuous access to patient records. Now, how have they done that? Well, first of all, they're using AWS, which has very high service resiliency. What we're seeing on this chart here is the number for every downtime that's out there or any large-scale event that's out there. We're measuring that, multiplying it with the number of services that are affected by that event, multiplying it by the number of regions that are impacted by that. And then we sum the services outages for a year for each of the 4 main cloud providers. Now at AWS, we are customer obsessed. We don't obsess over the other vendors. So I've simply anonymized them to be cloud providers OMG. In 2023, AWS continued to have the lowest service disruption hours out of any of the providers. The next most resilient cloud provider still failed 3.8 times more than AWS. And I think this really comes out of how AWS was born. They were born out of the need to make Amazon.com continually available. There is no compression algorithm to experience, we like to say. And a lot of this is we've been doing this the longest. And for every large-scale event that we've had, we do a very deep root cause analysis of it to try to prevent it from happening again. And you'll notice that it was non-zero, right? So we still have to plan for application resilience on top of that, such that if a service was to fail, we can still be able to keep the system up and running, whether it's full read-write, whether it's read-only access. We plan for all that. And this comes out of the EPIC on AWS reference architecture, which is a product of the AWS well-architected framework. While on premises, EPIC production and alternate production is typically spread across 2 data centers. In AWS, we spread EPIC across 2 regions, and within each region, 3 availability zones. So that's like spreading risk across 6 data centers. That really helps it be reliable. So reliability. The other feedback is around speed, application speed. Every health system running production EPIC on AWS shared with us that they have seen at least a 20% improvement in average response time. And more importantly, they have seen at least a 50% reduction in the number of workflows missing their response time target. So why is that? Well, in most cases, these organizations are coming from off of on-premises and older on-premises hardware, and they're moving that over to newer, faster servers and storage. And just like on-premises, when you get new hardware out there, things are really fast. But when running on-premises, however, you're trying to get the greatest life out of those servers as possible to justify the capital investment. And so you try to run them from 3 to 4 years. And the systems tend to get a little slower as the newer features are running on older and older hardware. Things slow down. In the AWS cloud, you can refresh your entire farm with the newer, faster AMD or Intel processors when they become available. So you can imagine refreshing your entire farm during a monthly maintenance window and doing that every 6 to 9 months as technology comes available. And here's the thing, we want you to do that because this new technology has better P ratings on it, which allows us to cut costs and hit our sustainability goals. And we pass those savings on to you. As an example, one of your peers, live with EPIC on AWS for 2 years, upgraded the presentation tier to new EC2 instances that had improved response time, but also nearly doubled the session density on those instances. This almost halved the number of instances that were needed. And they shared with us that they estimated saving $1.2 million a year just by doing this. And what's really nice about it, it gives the caregivers that continuous excellent response time consistently. Now, the other reason for speed is the Nitro system. Outside of AWS, EPIC runs on software-based virtualized servers. So the virtualization for storage and network encryption, decryption, that type of thing is done on the host. In AWS, the Nitro systems takes care of that. We put those subsystems onto firmware, and we offload that from the host. That makes it faster, but it also gives the hosts a lot more resources to perform the workload that's required to run on them. And we perform this at scale. EPIC sizes their workloads on AWS higher than any other cloud provider using native cloud services. And this is for both the scale-up symmetric multiprocessing, or SMP systems, as well as the scale-out ECP configurations. So we've talked about reliability, we've talked about speed. The other one is security. I think first and foremost, this is your data. We do not have access to it. In our shared security model, we provide security of the cloud, and we provide you with HIPAA-eligible services and HITRUST certified services for you to provide security within the cloud. And you still continue to determine who has access to the patient records, and you still are able to audit it in the way that you're familiar with. And finally, so we've hit on reliability, speed, security, and cost optimization. Now, it's often common to talk about cost savings when looking at a new technology. Reducing costs is important, but it feels transactional. This isn't something that you do one time. It's something that as your IT needs change, we all need to be good stewards of cost. And this brings us to Geisinger Health, in my mind, the champions of FinOps. And to tell us a little bit more about the Geisinger Epic journey, please welcome Marlon Moyer.
Good afternoon, and thank you for taking some time to join us and learn a little bit about our story, but more importantly about how you can leverage what we learned to make your own story. I've been with Geisinger for just shy of 19 years. Geisinger has been on Epic, our first implementation in 1996, a year after we signed, so very early adopters of Epic, and also very early adopters of technology in general. It has been our passion to really redefine boundaries and make our hospital the best. Our founder in 1915, that was one of her lines. We opened early because of a pandemic, and her line was, "Make it the best." And that's really been our goal in IT and our goal as an organization over the more than a decade that we've been delivering care to our patients, educating the next generation of providers, and providing healthcare to our members across the community. So where did we start? This is our plan, but before that, there's a lot of planning that goes into even making a decision about migrating to the cloud. It's not just about doing it because Geisinger did it, or doing it because another one of the organizations did it, and now it's the cool thing to do. It's doing it because it makes sense to do it. And each organization needs to understand, why does it make sense for them to do it? What are the goals that you want to achieve by doing something like this? This is not, an inexpensive in both cost as far as dollars as well as man hours. But if you're out to achieve a goal and you can achieve it, it's a worthwhile expenditure. And that's what we have found. So one of the first things we did is identify who can we partner with to help us do this. Deloitte was that chosen partner, along with AWS as our cloud provider, in order to move us from on-premise data centers that we had two of and made large investments in over the years to the cloud. And as we put together our plan, you'll see in there, it's not just about Epic for us. This is all-encompassing. Our goal is to have things in the cloud first and on-premise as a last resort. That is the value that we have seen in the cloud over the last 2 years that we've had systems live, and since we began this initiative. So as we look specifically at Epic, one of the things that we look at is, how do we do it in a way that we are going to feel confident in our success? We have been very successful in deploying our Epic instance to our caregivers, to our patients, to our providers outside in the community for more than 20 years at the point that we were talking about this. And so how do we do it so we maintain that? And so we come up with a very strong plan. We actually first started moving other clinical applications before we moved Epic. We stood up an entire training instance. And for those that are familiar with Epic, that's not just one environment, that's an entire training stack in the cloud. And we tested to ensure that it would work. We looked at everything down to printing. How many folks feel that they're paperless? Good, I see no hands, because that's not a reality. There's always paper. I wish we could get rid of it, but there's always paper. And one of the most demanding jobs on your bandwidth is actually your printing when you're talking about this. So we did testing on everything from peripherals to printing, and eventually it culminated in us moving our proof of concept, our test, and then our production environments into the cloud. An interesting part about our journey to the cloud is actually our production migration. We were intended to move production to the cloud in September allow it to run there for 1 week, and move it back on-prem for approximately 3 more months, during which time we would do a release upgrade and we would prepare Region 2. So this all changed, though, on day 3 of being in the cloud. We were receiving phone calls from our providers. We were receiving phone calls from our analysts. They were all happy phone calls, which is, I know, for all of you in healthcare IT, that's odd. People were calling us to tell us how well it was running, how much it has reduced their time, improved their responsiveness. You always hear when something is running slower. It's very rare you hear, oh my gosh, this is running well. And so we decided as a leadership team, we were calling an audible. And we left the instance in the cloud. We developed Plan B that said we would stay in the cloud. We would do an upgrade in the cloud that had not been tested. We are very diligent testers. We performed the upgrade in the cloud. We continued our migration of all of those hybrid servers that we were intending to transition over that 3-month period. And we just stayed there till December. And in December, we failed over to Region 2, and a week later failed back to Region 1. All successfully. And I think all because of our diligence in really identifying and testing and validating and partnering with Epic, with AWS, and with Deloitte to make sure that we were setting up a stable, scalable, and secure system. Going along with why did we receive those phone calls? Well, here is the Epic graph. From those of you that are live, you'll recognize System Pulse. Oh, my apologies. I'm a slide ahead of myself. This is actually the cost. So I'm going to talk a little bit about right sizing. I got ahead of myself, all excited there. We're going to talk about cost. And so as Mike talked about, our ability to leverage new technologies, it's also about leveraging alternative technologies in the cloud. And so one of the things that we saw was when we migrated up, we used the same configuration that we had planned for based upon what we were seeing on premise. And what we actually saw was we had too much. We didn't need it. So we were able to scale back our number of servers. We also added servers in anticipation of our release upgrade and the increased demand on the systems. We were able to scale those back. And we'll see that in a couple more slides as well. But overall, what we were able to show is our costs actually reduced from what we were expecting when we went live through right sizing, through alternative instance types, which I think is important as we talked about more instance types, newer technology, XLs, 2XLs, 4XLs, whatever it is, finding that right mix for the demand. This is going to get into a little bit of that FinOps that's coming up, is really identifying what you need and right-sizing your environment. So then we can look here, our number of EC2 instances, and you'll notice it trends down, which is great. We were able to reduce the number of servers. Reduced number of servers is reduced costs, right? Yes? How many say reduced number of servers is reduced cost? How many say it's not? It depends. It depends. It's a great answer. It depends. So actually, my team is right now putting together the plans. We are going to add about 100 additional servers. But because we're able to go to newer technology and we're able to right size down as far as the instance size, we are actually going to be able to reduce the cost even though we're increasing the number of servers. And so this is where FinOps really becomes a program. It's not a project. It is not once and done. It is truly a program. You need a FinOps team, and that team involves not only the people who, that's their day-to-day job, is to manage your financial operations, but also ensuring that you have analysts and server management folks that are engaged to know what do they need, what are they utilizing, recognizing opportunities, and then executing on them. Now I get to talk about the response times. I got ahead of myself. But what you can see here on this is over the course of more than a year, our number of workflows continued to increase or at least plateau. It did not drop. That's the important part. It never went down overall on that graph line. However, you'll notice in August, as we migrated to Epic's Hyperdrive platform, we saw a decrease in the workflow exceptions. That was great. We were happy to see that. But that second big dip there in September is what we were not expecting to see. And that was just simply from transitioning into the cloud. And you'll notice, even as we continued to do the right sizing, reducing the number of servers, ensuring we're maximizing capacity, we still managed to maintain or decrease even further those workflow exceptions. And that's very meaningful to the providers. And for the record, when I say providers, that's anybody in our healthcare delivery system, whether they're the registrar, the nurse, the physician, the laboratory, radiology. Everybody's time is important, and we need to maximize it. So then again, looking at some of the cost savings, this is for our production instance only, but you're able to see that we went up because we were planning for the release upgrade, so we increased the number of servers, but then we quickly realized we don't need all of those. Not only did we not need what we spun up for the upgrade, we didn't need what we started with, and we were able to reduce that and execute cost savings plans in order to maximize our operations. So I'm really looking forward to the next part where I get to get asked a whole bunch of questions, and we'll go where it wants to take us, and also looking forward to any questions that you have. So just.
Well, thank you, Marlon. Appreciate that. And congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
That was fantastic. And think of it as I don't take for granted the trust that you guys have placed in us. And we're going to continue to work for you out here. Thank you for sharing that information. I do have some questions for you.
Okay.
These are, to be fair, these are prepared questions. I've already given Marlon a little heads up of what they're going to be. But the interesting thing is when I talk with some of the health systems out there, I often hear that there's this perception of a challenge when taking on new technology while still managing the existing technology. Now, going back to that migration process, what was Geisinger's approach to ensuring seamless support for critical healthcare applications during the cloud migration?
Support was an interesting aspect for us, and it really started very early on. And it included education for everybody. We educated our senior executives on what is this thing called the cloud. They're very smart people, but we got to the next level so they could understand what we're trying to do. We educated our folks that would be supporting the actual migration, the server analysts, the network analysts, and we also educated our application analysts. I think that was the biggest key was this is not something that needed to be done for a specific project. It was really preparing ourselves for how are we going to operate for the next 20, 30, 40 years. I'm sure, as we saw this morning in the keynote, there's lots changing at AWS. So we'll continue to learn new things, but it was really about preparing ourselves. I think education for everybody was our first step. I think partnering with our Deloitte partners and specifically using a philosophy that I am very much a proponent of is watch one, do one, teach one. And that was important with our Deloitte partners because we didn't want to just have them come in and do all the work for us. That would have been easy for us to do, but how do you support it? You support it better by understanding what was done during the time frame. And so I think that was the other one, is really that philosophy of having people engaged throughout the process and doing the work themselves.
Thanks, Marlon. You've said that you can never really expect everything to go flawlessly. So I'm wondering if you could share some examples of how Geisinger proactively prepared for some of the potential events or incidents that could impact the application operations.
I could ask the question to the audience and say, how many of you know everywhere that your users go and access the data and all the websites and interactions that your EHR does? And I would tell you that's one of the things that we asked ourselves and really did a lot of work, because there's a lot of touch points now with the interoperability and how the EHRs talk to each other and how much outreach you have to doing things. Integrations with Apple Health Kit and things of that nature has allowed us to really think about where all do we need to go. And what we needed to prepare for was ensuring we understood those. Because as we made our transition to the cloud, one of our goals was not to just redo what we did in the on-prem data centers. And so we found that we wanted to implement more accounts in order to segregate our data, even within ourselves. We increased the number of firewalls we had. Epic is in its own account, so it is firewalled from everything else. So anytime you wanted to have an interaction, you needed to open those firewall ports. And I think that was one of our biggest challenges, was really ensuring that we understood everything and bringing together. We support about 900 applications in the clinical enterprise. Bringing that all together and understanding where all do we really exchange data is critical to that. And so I think that is maybe one example on how we prepared and what we learned from it.
Thanks. So it gets me thinking a little bit about, especially with some of the recent cyber security events that have happened. So what specific measurements or measures did Geisinger take to enhance the security and resiliency of its cloud environment and the critical applications during those events?
Well, I probably just got ahead of myself on my answer with splitting it out into different accounts and really strengthening that firewall was definitely one of the number one things. But even instituting some things that maybe you don't feel you need to when you're in your own data center. We are very cognizant of everything that's going on. I think we were cognizant of it before the Change Healthcare events, but I think everybody's even more cognizant of what one small issue can do. So we looked at it, everything from what are the protective softwares that we use CrowdStrike as an option, ensuring that's deployed on all of our instances, establishing better processes to ensure steps are followed as we migrate to the cloud. So as I said, this isn't just about lifting and shifting, it's about really thinking holistically as to what do you want to be at the end. So I think developing more specific processes as to how to do things, adding in the additional firewalls, establishing protocols for allowing connections to be opened up and authorizing them was another big one. It's not red tape. A lot of folks will say, well, why do we have to have all this red tape? It's not red tape. It's a protection, and I really think that's important to look at it that way.
Let's switch to FinOps, if we can. Okay, you shared a little bit about some examples that you've done with FinOps. I'm kind of curious how Geisinger leveraged the cloud migration as really that opportunity to optimize cost and implement FinOps practices.
If I had it to do over again, I think I would have invested more in FinOps sooner in the process. I think that's a lesson learned. Primarily because you have an opportunity to be reacting to what you're seeing as soon as you go live. And if you don't have the FinOps program established yet, you're not able to actually leverage those opportunities. But what I think we did is we clearly and quickly recognized that and got that into a place to better, and we continue to build it out. We are not perfect. One of our program directors at the organization that's her job. She's doing a wonderful job at working through truly developing that program and looking at all of the opportunities. I think where it's important is to establish a couple of things, and again, a lot of this is with process. As we look at our FinOps, there's competing things too when you think about FinOps. If you do a compute savings plan where you commit to using so much storage, so much compute, that's great. You're going to save on that, but you're committed to that. If you have somebody else who's working on how do I reduce my compute utilization, you could be crossing each other out. And I think that's important to really look at the holistic program. And that's why I say I would have done it more, because I think that's an area where we could have educated folks more. We've seen, a great decrease. I'm going to switch off of compute for just a minute, because I think the other opportunity where you have to really think about things is we leveraged and saw a lot of benefit from backup strategies. Call it old school. I mean, we had backups. We still have backups and backups. But you look at what is the new technology that's available, and you look at what are the new threats that are available. So we were able to significantly decrease our backup costs by looking and exploring how do we do that? How many days do we retain those? How many days do we retain a full copy? And then also, and I think this is one of the things that has allowed us to be even better, the ability when you're in the cloud to do an offline backup, so to speak, or a secured snapshot for what everybody hopes never happens, but don't ever plan that it'll never happen, has been another area where we were able to get better at a lower cost. And that was, I think, one of our biggest opportunities there as well.
That's great. There was a recent KLAS report that came out, Epic on the Cloud. And it was interesting taking a look at the comments there. Almost every respondent had said they had seen an improvement in response times going to AWS. In fact, 75% said that it was significant. The other side of it, they were saying that they hadn't quite seen cost savings yet. And I'm kind of curious from your perspective. I kind of imagine that they haven't been embracing the FinOps side of things quite just yet, to your point. But I'm kind of curious as how if you can expand a little bit more. You touched on it a little bit there, but a little bit more on balancing the cost optimization while still improving response times for your providers.
Absolutely. Well, I think from the cost optimization perspective, it depends how you figure out what it costs you to run your data center. And also that's where I go back to the FinOps program starting earlier is I would anticipate that most organizations don't actually know what it costs them to run an individual server. Because what are your fixed costs for security? What are your costs for the building it's running in, the power, the cooling? With AWS, you see that. You see an all-encompassing cost because you guys have done that hard work to figure it out. Mm-hmm. We don't have that, or we didn't have a good idea of per server what does it cost. So I think that becomes a first point when you're really looking at where are those cost savings? Are you really taking all of your expense and putting it together to find your cost savings? For us, as far as balancing it, our patients come first, and we have to make sure that we are delivering for them. And as IT, we're delivering for them through our caregivers. And so we continue to do a very fair amount of testing and validation before we will go to a new instance type. Mm-hmm. We will be able to see how that instance type is performing at a scale before we actually scale it out and replace all. So while you said you can absolutely replace your entire farm or your entire EC2 instance types with an upgrade, you absolutely can. We typically go the approach of let's throw a couple in and validate and then see that performance. And I think that's where it goes back to that team who's responsible to make sure they're measuring that. The only other point I really want to make sure we talk about has to do with ensuring that you're listening to your users. Because you can look at dashboards of how are your systems performing, but unless you're talking to the users about what's their actual experience, that could be two different things. And so I think it's important to have a strong connection to your end users So we do that through, we have physician informaticians, nurse informaticians, folks that are out there. And we do that to make sure we're understanding, because we want to make sure we're doing the right thing fiscally while also delivering what are the needs. And we need to partner with the organization to understand what are those needs that need to be met.
So I've got 2 more questions.
Okay.
Okay, and then we'll see.
Then hopefully we have some questions here.
From the audience, exactly. So looking forward, now that you've been live with Epic Production on AWS for over a year, how has this enabled Geisinger to be more nimble and innovative in delivering care services or solutions? Any stories you can tell?
I hate to say this phrase because I really think it always comes across negative, but fail fast. But I think it's a reality. And so one of the things, we also have a very large research area, and they leverage a lot of Epic data coming out and de-identified, of course, to make sure we remain compliant. But one of the things that we've been able to do is scale up research instances, research work, do the analysis and identify, is that something to follow through on or not? I think that we are progressing now with some additional integrations, and that has become easier to manage. We no longer need to worry about the 3 or 6 month, or during the days of the pandemic, the 12-month delivery dates for another set of servers. So we're able to scale up and meet that need for the organization, whether it comes to our patient experience with electronic whiteboards in the patient rooms, delivering patient education through online mediums, Apple TVs or integrated platforms is another one, and really taking to the next step our virtual care opportunities, I think is another option. We are in rural Pennsylvania. We have some larger urban areas that we serve as a part of our footprint, but we also live in the area of Pennsylvania. Danville is in the place where most of the schools give the students Monday and Tuesday off because it's a long-standing tradition. They go hunting with their parents, and so when I talk about rural, that's where we are. But that also brings with it the challenges of delivering this stuff to all of those rural areas where there's maybe one ISP that will deliver a connection to a clinic. And so I think by being in the cloud, it has leveraged us to spend less time worrying about operating our data center and more time about how do we improve that experience in the clinics for the patients, and really working more on what does the organization want to move itself forward.
Oh, thanks. So Monday morning, folks that are currently running Epic on AWS, what advice would you give them as they return to the office on Monday?
First is find, and please don't give your colleagues that you're going to go ask these questions to my name. No, I'm kidding. Find your staff members that are using your Cost Explorer in AWS. Find who's running your System Pulse Analytics in Epic, or for that matter, your performance metrics in any application you're running in the cloud. And I would ask them, what are our opportunities? Because if you're in the cloud, there are tools right there to show you what some of those at least perceived opportunities are. And you may find, nope, we need this. But you may also find that that's great, but I don't need that thing, I don't need that server running over the weekends. So let's power it down and power it back up. I think those are the things that I would tell first is to find the information. Because without information, you can't make a difference. But there's a plethora of information available to you.
So as we take a look at the 4 things that you'd like them to, that you encourage them to do.
So a capacity assessment, I hit on that one. Sorry, I forgot I had these slides that we put together. Review your instance types. That's also in those opportunities. The instance types, I think, is the important part, is that don't just say, do I need to go smaller? Do I need to go larger? Do I need to go across? Look at all the aspects. Again, one of our examples is, we don't need a 4XL. We actually find more efficient for some service deliveries to be a 2XL and to have a few more of them from a cost-benefit perspective. The FinOps model, if you don't have somebody who is leading FinOps and that is their official title in some way, whether they have a title and it's subsequent over your FinOps department or your FinOps team, establish one. I think you will find benefit quickly in having a strong program. And I'm happy to connect you with our individual, Amy Evans, who is here and leading that for us as well, because I think, again, we are not perfect. That's the important thing to remember too, is nobody's perfect. We can all learn from each other, and I think that's the part of being here and sharing. And then if you're not in the cloud, or you don't have Epic in the cloud, or a large system in the cloud, is really be pushing for that. Push for, not go to the cloud, but push for why aren't we? And is there a benefit if we do? Because if you don't know the answers to those questions, then I think that, again, you don't have the information. The answer may be this system just cannot be in the cloud. Up until maybe 2 years ago, most of the PACS systems, the radiology imaging systems, they weren't cloud-based, and they weren't cloud-based because of the large bandwidth requirements that it would have to push those images around. Now we are starting to see vendors and systems and solutions that would allow for organizations to move even those most bandwidth heavy or very large needing systems to the cloud, and that's important. We saw it this morning in the keynote, the AI, everything that's up there. I mean, the power is there, and work with your vendors to really push them to leverage new technology. I think that's the other thing. You need to identify your vendor partners and leverage them to help you get where you want to go. But understanding where you want to go is first and foremost.
And for those of you that are running Epic not in the cloud right now, or not on AWS, there's 4 things that I would encourage you to do. Is first of all, work with your AWS account executive to schedule an immersion day where we talk about the Epic on AWS reference architecture. And secondarily, we've got a curated curriculum of training, AWS training, that your Epic certified system administrators, the operational database administrators, the Epic client system administrators, those ECSAs can get familiar with operating Epic on AWS. And what we're seeing is that more and more organizations are interested in taking a way of implementing Epic on AWS while reducing their business risk by standing up an isolated recovery environment in AWS. This is a replica, a tertiary copy of production Epic. It's something in addition to production and alternate production, different location, such that if your Epic on-premises systems are taken offline due to a ransomware event, you can still provide access to the patient records in this isolated recovery environment. This is something that you can stand up very quickly. Working with one of our key partners, you can get that stood up within 8 weeks. And what we found is that this has actually helped to improve clinical resiliency and reduce business risk. And in some cases, actually many cases, it actually allowed for the reduction of your cyber insurance premiums. So it's a quick way to get going on it. It's relatively low risk. And it's what we call a two-way door, because if it doesn't work out for you, there's no long-term commitment. Stop using it, shut it down, and you're not paying for it anymore. And then after you get familiar with it, that's really where we're taking a look, I think, at the advice that you're giving is, okay, what else? What else can we do? And making sure that FinOps happens much earlier in the process. But part of that is around education too, kind of knowing what levers you have to pull. And working with partners, working with AWS, we can certainly help with that.
Absolutely.
Well, Marlon, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you all.